The United States is this nearly 250-year-old experiment that has completely reshaped the world. But how on earth did a handful of colonies manage to spark a revolution and then grow into a global superpower? Well, in this explainer, we're going to unpack that incredible story.
From a rebellious upstart to a global leader, the American journey has really been one of constant and often turbulent reinvention. It's a story that's defined by these incredible founding ideals, but also by the intense conflicts over what those ideals truly mean in practice.
Okay, so let's really dive into this. We're going to explore the pivotal moments that shaped the nation, and we're going to start long before its official birth.
Right, so our story begins not in the 18th century, but thousands and thousands of years earlier, with the continent's very first inhabitants.
For literally thousands of years, this continent was home to a rich tapestry of native cultures. But that world was just shattered in 1492 with the arrival of Europeans. This timeline here shows the key moments that followed. You've got the first permanent English settlement at Jamestown in 1607, and then, just 12 years later, the arrival of the first enslaved Africans. You see, these two events, colonization and slavery, they would become the twin pillars and really the central conflict of the nation to come.
So, as these colonies flourished, they developed this really strong sense of self-governance, through their local legislatures. But the final say, that always came from London. It was this delicate balance maintained across an entire ocean, and it was a single global war that would finally cause it to completely shatter.
Look, from London's perspective, it was simple. The French and Indian War had protected the colonies, so the colonies should help pay for it. Makes sense, right? But the colonists saw it very differently. To them, taxes imposed by a parliament where they had zero voice, that wasn't just unfair, it was an act of tyranny. No taxation without representation wasn't just a catchy slogan, it was a fundamental challenge to all of British authority.
And just look at how quickly things escalated. You go from the protest to the Boston Tea Party in 1773 to open rebellion just 2 years later. Britain's attempt to clamp down with these so-called intolerable acts, well, it backfired spectacularly. All it did was unite the colonies against the common enemy and set the stage for that world-changing declaration of 1776. But winning a war and building a nation, they are two very, very different things. The next great challenge was figuring out how to create a government from scratch, to turn the chaos of revolution into a functioning republic. So, their first attempt at a government, the Articles of Confederation, was basically designed to be weak. They were terrified of creating a new king, so the states kept nearly all the power for themselves. The problem? Without a strong center to hold them together, the nation was literally falling apart. It couldn't pay its debts or put down uprisings like Shays' Rebellion. The whole experiment was on the verge of collapse. And the solution, as this chart shows so clearly, was the Constitution. It created a federal government that was actually strong, with the power to tax and to unite the states. But the true genius of it was how it divided that power. By creating 3 co-equal branches of government, the founders built a system of checks and balances, all designed to prevent any one part from becoming too powerful. All right, with a new government in place, the young nation began to look westward. It was driven by this powerful idea that would fuel both incredible growth and a deep, tragic internal conflict. The expansion really began with a single, incredible deal. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase instantly doubled the size of the United States. Boom. Just like that. For pennies an acre, the nation got a territory larger than Western Europe, and this just fueled a powerful new idea about its future. And this idea was called Manifest Destiny. It was this powerful, almost religious belief that the United States was literally destined to stretch from coast to coast. It was a vision that propelled pioneers westward, for sure, but it was also a justification for war and for the brutal displacement of the native peoples who already called those lands home. And with every new mile of territory, it forced this one contentious question that had haunted the nation since 1619. Would these new lands allow slavery? This wasn't a new issue, not by a long shot, but westward expansion just brought the simmering conflict to a furious boil.
For decades, a really tense peace was maintained through a series of political compromises. The whole goal was to keep the number of free states and slave states perfectly equal, so neither side could dominate the Senate. But as this chart shows, it was a precarious balance. And by the 1850s, those compromises were failing, replaced by actual bloodshed in places like Bleeding Kansas.
The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, that was the breaking point. Southern states, fearing he would move to abolish slavery, just started leaving the Union. Then in April 1861, the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter. The Civil War, the nation's defining trial by fire, had begun.
So after 4 devastating years, the Union was preserved and slavery was abolished. And from the ashes of this brutal conflict, the United States was completely remade, setting the stage for its dramatic rise on the world stage.
The century that followed the Civil War was just a relentless series of global tests. As this timeline shows, America stepped onto the world stage in the Spanish-American War, it abandoned its isolationism for World War I, it survived the economic devastation of the Great Depression, and was finally forged into a global superpower by the fires of World War II. The post-war world pretty much became a global chessboard, pitting two superpowers against each other. The thing about the Cold War is that it wasn't a direct conflict between the US and the Soviet Union. It was a decades-long struggle for dominance, fought with spies, with proxy wars, and with the constant, terrifying threat of nuclear annihilation.
The end of the Cold War in 1991 didn't bring an end to conflict. Not at all. Instead, it brought new global challenges and forced the nation to confront old, unresolved wounds right at home.
The modern era has really been a story of confronting old demons and new threats. At home, you had the civil rights movement, which challenged the nation to finally live up to its promise of equality for all its citizens. And on the world stage, the end of the Cold War gave way to the new reality of global terrorism after 9/11, while the 2008 financial crisis shook the very foundations of the global economy.
So, after nearly 250 years of revolution, civil war, expansion, and global conflict, the American experiment continues. It remains a story of these incredibly high ideals and really deep contradictions, a nation that's constantly wrestling with its own identity. The past is written, but the next chapter, it's not. What do you think it's going to hold?